Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I am joined by Danielle Krischik, partner and chief strategy officer at Knight Agency. Danielle is a client strategy leader who has led culture and communications initiatives for Tier 1 brands, including MasterCard, Starwood Hotels and Resorts, the United States Tennis Association, Coca-Cola Consolidated, and many more. She brings more than 20 years of experience developing inside-out brands and is a former award-winning creative director and copywriter with clients from Hard Rock to Hilton to the Tampa Bay Lightning. In this conversation, we are not talking about external marketing and branding, though. We are talking about internal marketing and branding, the stories that we tell our employees about who we are as a business and who they can expect to be by working in the business with us. This was a really interesting conversation. I love any conversation around storytelling. If you've listened to the show for any time, you know that. But this is, how do we find and tell our internal stories? How do we tap into those messages that really resonate with employees about who we are and why we're here? How do we make those not just messages, but actions? How do we make those our behaviors and how we show up, how we talk to each other, how we treat each other? And then how do we make that last so that people feel good over time and that the magic of that becomes the magic of our culture and creates our success? Really fun conversation. We talked a lot about how to pull out these stories. I even shared my own story at Danielle's prompting and all the way through the actual execution. There's a ton in here. If you're interested in any of these topics, I encourage you to reach out to Danielle or reach out to me. I'm always happy to continue the conversation on anything we talk about here on the show. You can do that best through LinkedIn messages. Drop me a line. Let me know what resonated, and happy to continue the conversation or share more. That said, here is Danielle Krischik. Danielle, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on, connected through our mutual friend, Marshall Lockton. Marshall, thank you for that connection. And I am always excited to bring on someone to talk about storytelling and how to do that better in different facets of work. And I think internal branding and storytelling is a really interesting conversation that is getting a lot more attention, but I would say is probably still under-attentioned in the workplace. Excited to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. This is a privilege because with everything you do with people, storytelling can still be in the category of the soft stuff and the fluff, and we'll get to it when we can. We have a lot of other more pressing issues. I'm hoping that we can have conversation about why it's actually, in some cases, critical to creating an environment where people want to stay and grow.
So let's start at the beginning. What is Knight Agency and what do you do? I mean, obviously, we just teed it up with internal storytelling, but can you give a little bit more context as to what Knight Agency is?
Yeah, Knight is a marketing agency, really, and we build brands from the inside out. We started 30 years ago, and that was before my time. I'm too young to have started this agency, but Mike Hinn, who is the founder and is still with us and very active in the business. They kind of started in publishing and went through the .com era and all of that, but then shifted into internal marketing, communications, engagement, purpose, all of that kind of work. We have practice areas in purpose and performance, learning and development, and then our traditional brand work, which is creative and copywriting and design and things like that.
What does purpose and performance work look like?
Yeah, it's all that inside out brand work and storytelling and HR integration. It's employer brand and EVP, and it's creating purpose and values for companies, North Star narratives, storytelling. It's all that internal kind of comms and HR integration work. We have capability to really take HR all the way and do things like comp analysis and total rewards, but we typically stay in the communication side of things with some HR integration to make what we say and promise real.
Interesting. And what's the main difference that you found between doing internal marketing and branding work versus doing more external marketing and branding work? Is it the same, or are there some marked differences?
That's a great question. I love that you asked that because, I started my career in traditional advertising copywriting. So I was writing, I'm going to date myself by saying this, but radio spots and billboards and things like that. And that was all meant to get consumers engaged and excited and ultimately spending on your product or service. Internal is different in that you really have a captive audience and they're paying with the most precious asset they have, which is their time. And the goal is to really get them engaged, get them believing, feeling like they belong, and stay with you for a long time and grow with the company for a long time. So, which I know is very different today. People are not staying 30 years and getting the gold watch at the end of it, that kind of thing. I know Locked In does that part a little bit differently. But, it really is that engaged audience that is giving you their most precious commodity, which is their time. And you honor that by building a story and a culture, ultimately, that gives them something back.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the pairing of those two because I think that's going to be really important. But first, how and where are clients using this work? What are the deliverables that you're helping them create? And what are they using it to do? And then we'll dive into what the work is and storytelling and all of that. But I'm just curious, why is somebody hiring you and where does that work go?
Yeah, so most of our clients, all of our clients actually have a growth strategy. And, the more audacious the growth strategy, the more they need to focus on culture because they need to bring people along. So the majority of what they call us for is to keep good talent or recruit new good talent. And so, in order to do that, we typically start with the foundational elements, which is the purpose and the values and a North Star narrative, getting the leadership aligned. And then it kind of moves into the other communications pieces. We look at the communications ecosystem and make sure that we're showing up in the right way with the right story and the right messaging and all the places where that matters. And then we look at kind of the integration with HR piece. Is what we're saying true and how is it being used in the operations of the organization? So if we're promising, for example, that we care about well-being in our benefits package, are we offering some richer wellness programming? But to zoom out, really, they're using it to retain talent and to attract the right talent, new talent.
Do you have an example? So I think the attracting talent one is an easier one for people to visualize because, again, it's external. It's putting your brand out there in the market, right? It's whether it's on job boards or even like a LinkedIn page for a company or even like an Instagram page or something like that. I think we get that.
Mm-hmm.
But the internal stuff, could you just have a couple examples of where your communications are used internally that drive retention?
Yes, absolutely. So retention to me, is all about employees or team members feeling like they can grow with the company, they can be themselves and belong, they have value, they are seen and heard, all of those things. So storytelling really helps with that. It's kind of a secret weapon to make that possible. So an example, we work with MasterCard and their global inclusion team was kind of setting out to expand all the work they were doing with inclusion. They kind of engaged us to initially put together some language around what it is, why it's important, why people should care. And we did some listening sessions. And in those listening sessions, we learned diversity for them wasn't enough. Just having different people join the company, that was the low-hanging fruit. Inclusion wasn't enough. Now that I'm here and I'm different, I have a seat at the table and a voice in the room. Not enough. They started to talk about, I want to feel like people actually care about who I am as a human being. And that's kind of where this whole belonging thing started. I'm not saying MasterCard started belonging or we did, although I'd love to claim that because we did put it out there years before it became a thing. But what I am saying is the collective voice represented this idea that They wanted to feel like who they were as human beings mattered. So we developed a narrative against that. I wrote that actually and voiced it over. And we did a video using my terrible Rochester accent, but it was such a true and real story. It really rallied people around and got them in support of this entire thing that inclusion was doing. Off of that came business resource group summits where we had story sharing moments and belonging moments. People made personal commitments. They hand wrote them to create a culture of belonging at MasterCard. And then we were invited, because that was so successful and it really was something people were then talking about in a meaningful way. We were invited to their leadership summit, their annual summit, where 250 of the top executives at MasterCard went up to this cool interactive booth we created and committed to creating a culture of belonging at MasterCard. So it started as, let's listen to what everybody cares about. Let's write a story that represents the collective belief. And then it kind of blew up and really became a part of the belief system at MasterCard. That drove engagement in wild ways that we never expected.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for that example. So let's start at the beginning of this. You've mentioned North Star narrative a couple times. Mm-hmm. I imagine that is at least one of the first places that you would go. But like, what does an engagement look like for you when you're working with a new client to figure out who they are and what they need and where they're trying to go?
Yeah. So we always start with the assessment kind of side of things, and that's research. We do look at things like the engagement survey just to see, that's the pulse check on how people are thinking and feeling. But then we ultimately always do listening sessions. And I'd like to think, unlike typical focus groups where you've got everybody in a room and you've got a bowl of M&Ms in the center of the table and you're asking people these very rigid questions, we have conversations with people. And, we position ourselves as, hey, listen, like we're a third cousin of the company. You can say whatever you want. We're not going to report, and attach names to the soundbite. But we really ask those second and third layer questions, get a deeper understanding of what people are feeling and believing. And we have that. We almost always, unless there's a reason we can't, meet with the C-suite as well. And we have a nice conversation with CEO, CHRO, COO if we're lucky, CFO even, to ask them kind of where they're going and what their vision is. And then we find connection points between that conversation and the ones we've had with employees. That starts to develop, okay, here are some of the things that are true and some of the things we can believe in. We do some benchmarking as well, kind of in that step, just to, see where they kind of line up with other similar organizations. We move from there into North Star, and that's really where we either develop a purpose or we challenge the purpose in place. Like, is the purpose that you currently have, is it true? Do people really believe that? Principles or values sort of come out of that work. Again, it's either developing from scratch or challenging what they currently have. Then we look at behaviors. So now we have our belief system. How do we want people and especially leaders to behave? And then we develop usually a narrative, and that's that North Star. And that typically turns into a video of some sort. My voice is on a lot of those. They always want Morgan Freeman, but I'm free. So they use me for those videos. But so once those foundational pieces are set, we start to move into leadership alignment. We really need the leaders to believe in and buy off on this work, or it all falls apart. We usually have great success getting employees to believe. We do things that are very inspirational and aspirational and also very true, and they feel good about it. But if the leaders aren't on board, they see them not modeling the behaviors, it kind of all falls apart. So leadership alignment is a big piece of that. Some of this work does go into leadership competencies and skills because, again, it all has to connect. Then we move into communication activation. We do a storytelling campaign typically. We look at brand development. What does this look like? What does this feel like? What are the touch points? People stories is another component where we start to collect real stories from real employees to use as proof points that all of this work is actually true and authentic. Purpose and values playbook. How do we use this work? Why is it important to us? And then, of course, all the communications integration moments. And then the final two pieces are, as I mentioned earlier, the HR integration piece. We stay typically in employer brand. We look at orientation training and that kind of experience, values training, because, we could put a poster on the wall with the new values, but it's more important that people understand them, know how to act and behave against them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, leadership development. And then finally, how does it last? So we look at things like always on storytelling, brand activations. What could we do different at town halls to make it fun? And then any kind of new signature programming to make all of this work relevant and true. I know that's a full gamut of.
Yeah, we're not going to have enough time to unpack all of that, but
right.
let's jump back to a few pieces of it, because that was great. No, I appreciate the full talk about a story, right? That was the full arc of it. But let's go back all the way to the beginning on your focus groups and your conversations there. You said, we don't just ask surface level questions. We ask really good second and third level questions. What makes a really good second and third level question when you're doing discovery and you're trying to surface like rich, fertile content or information?
The interviewer has to be a fantastic listener and someone who has great empathy. That is like the magic of the whole thing. So I've done a lot of these listening sessions myself. Before we really formalize our process and kind of made this a thing. And I should have mentioned earlier, Knight has been acquired by Meraki. Meraki is Marshall Lockton's company. So he is our new owner. And he's really put a lot in place to formalize all of these offerings. But before that, we were doing this work really scrappy. And I was the person in the chair doing the qualitative research and the interviews and the people stories and all of those things. You have to really listen to what people are saying, and you have to see them. You don't have to agree with any of their opinions or where they're coming from, but you have to really see them. So the second question is, I caught something you said. It sounded like you were questioning whether or not you believe in the purpose of the company. Talk to me about that. What are you questioning in the purpose, right? So that's a deep question. And then as they answer, then you kind of go in on that, so where is this coming from? Where did you work prior to this company where you might have a comparison where you don't know if you don't see what I'm saying? But it really takes, you can go in with it as an interviewer with an agenda and really just make sure that you get your sound bites, or you can look at the person for a human being and really go into what they feel and they believe on an individual level.
Yeah. Well, what strikes me is you are trying to uncover the full story of the person. I thought I like writing, which is why I like storytelling. And Stephen King has an autobiography that's also a writing instructional book called On Writing. And in that, he talks about an author being like an archaeologist and how the story is there. And you see the first piece of it poking through the surface, and then you need to go and you need to uncover what that story is. And it was that analogy that I sort of had playing in my head as you were talking about what you're doing when you're doing one of these interviews is like the person will give you a little piece of the story, and then you're sort of like brushing the dirt away and clearing the image so that you can see what that full story is that person is trying to drive at, that's hidden under the surface.
That's a great analogy. That is exactly what this is. I'll tell you a story. My first big project with Knight, it was about 12 and a half years ago, was for Starwood Hotels and Resort. You probably know them from the Westin, the Sheraton, the W. Yep. That's Starwood. They've since, of course, been bought by Marriott, but they were expanding globally and they wanted to better understand their global markets. So we pitched this idea of doing 100 stories about 100 people from 100 countries, which is like crazy cool to do, right? What an opportunity. They flew me to Dubai to do this. And by the way, I didn't even have a passport. I had never been out of the country and I'm on my way to Dubai. So why me? Trip. I don't know. But I had an approved set of questions, right? Like HR approved. tell me about your career journey. Why do you love Starwood? All the things you would think I would ask. First person walks in, it's a GM of a property, I think a Sheridan, and sits in front of me. And I don't know what came over me, but we're a couple of questions in. They're answering very professionally. And I looked into their soul, I guess, and I said, I feel like you're an overcomer. Tell me about that. Tell me about something you've overcome. And they cracked open and gave me this beautiful, vulnerable story. I mean, it was so human. It was so great. And I folded this approved list of questions and I put it under my seat and I said, I'm doing this for the rest of the, right? It was so good. Like HR is in the back of the room sweating, right?
Yeah.
So that is how it played out times 100. And in the end, what we got is this beautiful, I don't know if you're familiar with Humans of New York, but it was Humans of New York before that was a thing. It really was. It was, we did an integration campaign and, obviously helped them put all this into all of their communications channels. But picture, this is going to be dated too, but picture a microsite. And it was all these little boxes of faces. And you click on one and it was their story of who they are. The CEO at the time was the same size box as a housekeeper, the same size box as a GM of a hotel. And it was just a collection of these beautiful stories of overcoming and victories and challenges and underdogs and everything you can imagine. It was incredible. And that's when I knew, number one, a million people have said this is not new. Everybody has a story, but people want to share their stories. They really do want to talk about it. Everybody wants at some level to talk about it.
Yeah. We all want to talk about ourselves.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah. And giving people an attentive audience and a venue to do that allows people to open up. So I love that. Let me ask, let's go to the actionable side of that. So they did 100 stories. You put it on a website. Great. Awesome. Very cool for people who like that stuff. How did you drive attention to it and use it so that everybody in the rest of the business, the other few 100,000 employees felt connected to those stories? Great
question. We did a full integration guide where we developed a campaign. We had banners, pull-up banners with stories and people's faces on them for talent acquisition. We had digital ads for their intranet that led to the microsite where you could hear more stories. We had signage going on kind of in the hallways and any digital space. We implanted them in company emails. We featured them in town halls. I mean, it was full blown. And then we developed this integration guide so that every leader at Starwood knew how to use these stories and why they're important and where they should go. It was really an engagement play, a connection play, an inclusion play, certainly. It was very kind of ahead of its time on that. It even made its way into the investor deck when Starwood, we just learned this recently, when Starwood sold to Marriott, Marriott was exposed to real people stories. Here are the human beings that work here, and here's what they care about and believe in. So it kind of went everywhere because we made the effort to teach people how to use it.
Yeah, I love that. And those examples are good. And to your point, now you have 100 pieces of content that you can use and you can mix and match and use them however you want. So I love that. It's the Gary V guide to repurposing content. If you've seen any of his stuff, he talks about that all the time.
Oh, I love him. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So talking about how to get good insights out of people. The next thing I want to dive into from your original story there was the disconnect that can come when you are interviewing employees and interviewing executives. And I would just be curious, I would bet there's some disconnect in every client that you work with, right? There's something that the executives are thinking that is not jiving with the employees, or some experience the employees are having that the executives aren't aware of. What do you do with those disconnects? How do you bring them up in the right way? How do you get leaders to engage with them as best you can and start to close those gaps?
You have to reconcile by, again, deeply listening to the C-suite conversation, what they care about, what they're trying to build and where they're trying to go, listening to the employees. And when you find that there is a disconnect, finding the way to yes with, listen, you thought that we were going kind of in the direction of, let's just make sure, for lack of a better example, that everybody feels like they can find their passion here. Well, it turns out they don't want to find their passion at work. They want to find their passion outside of work. But here's another angle of the story that people do believe that will also align with where your vision is going. Let's consider that road. So it's never a drop the mic, sorry guys, you're wrong. People don't feel this way. It's always we have a different angle of the story to tell. There's always a story to tell. There's always a belief to find, and it might not be the belief that they consider. The other thing is, we have found when we ask these second and third layer questions and we get down to the authentic truth of what people really care about, when we present that to leadership, they're open to listening to that, because ultimately they don't want to lose good talent, people that are high performing, highly engaged. Not to mention the cost of replacement is extraordinary too. So they're pretty much open to hearing the truth as long as there is some arc that we can take to map back to where they want to go.
Got it. So let's jump into storytelling now, I think. Okay, so now we've got this content. We've sort of figured this out. Let's just talk about storytelling in general. What makes a good story?
So I knew you were going to ask this. I had a feeling. And, I kind of looked up the Pixar model of because I think Disney Pixar,
love that.
They're beautiful storytellers, right? And I looked it up because I wondered what their formula was and how close to that are we playing. So they say it's once upon a time, then every day, then one day, then because of that, and then until finally, right? And you can so see how that plays out in Toy Story, for example.
Yeah. So it's just to say that again, it's something was always happening until a major inciting incident happened. That sent things on this totally different path, and it was only reconciled by this final event.
Exactly.
And then we were in a better state.
Yeah. It's the story arc, right? So I think that a lot of our work follows that because, just to give a little soundbite here, I was a dancer. I very much understand how to bring an audience along. Our recitals were programmed the way they were programmed because you start with a number that kind of gets everybody excited, and then you bring in the ballet and everybody's flowing and feeling that, and then the tap number, right? So I kind of understand the choreography of entertainment in that way. Storytelling for corporate is no different than that. You really have to, here's what's going on. Here's one thing we'd like to believe in and like to achieve. Here's what's in the way of that. But we have a solution. This is how we're going to get there. So all you have to do is come along and the world will be a better place. Our world will be a better place in the end, right? It's the same sort of flow. So that's kind of one piece. The other thing I would say is it's authenticity. People don't have the tolerance for the glossy magazine level storytelling, especially in corporate, that they did back in the day, where you could say, this is a great place to work and everybody loves it. We just won this award for. Nobody really believes that anymore. What they really want is human-centered storytelling. And what I mean by that is hearing their voice in the story. So just to set the table on that, business-centered storytelling, again, coming just from, we can look it up and there's probably a million ways Google will explain it. But from my point of view, it's top down, it's numbers focused, sort of financially driven, and it positions things like innovation as a requirement. Whereas human-centered storytelling, it's employee voice out. It leads with the why, the purpose behind everything. And to draw a parallel, it positions things like innovation as an opportunity. That already feels better, right? We have an opportunity to build something cool versus we must be innovative.
Yeah. So I have a question I want to ask you, but it's going to be leading no matter how it comes out. So maybe I'll just say it as a statement. one of the things that I think about with storytelling too, especially in a corporate space, is I think people get a little off because they're like, well, I don't have this long story to tell, or I don't have the time to tell this long story. And I think one of the best pieces of advice that I've heard is if you think about storytelling elements and you work those into communications, that can be really impactful. And I think the best one there is analogy or metaphor. And I think what metaphor and analogy do is they put an image in somebody's head. It's either analogies, I think, put a movie in somebody's head. And I think metaphors put an image in somebody's head, and we connect emotionally to the things that we see. And so if we can see that movie playing in our head, or we can create that movie in somebody else's head, now we're creating a more emotional connection. And so that might seem a little esoteric, but I think I have found in my own communications, the more I don't necessarily worry about having like a full story arc, but just try to use more imagery and more story elements, I find that it connects more. How do you react to that, I guess would be the question.
Certainly, that is very powerful. I think imagery does spark emotion, and I do think that's very powerful. On a even simpler level, though, we launched a purpose statement for a construction company, and it was simply build from why. Everything we do has a reason, and we're going to get better at thinking about the reason before we do things. The leader did a town hall to sort of launch this purpose and get into this idea of why. And he told his personal story in front of all of his leaders and why he's in this business in the first place, why he gets out of bed every morning. And it really came down to, all they build, this particular company, is the shell and the foundation. And then they go away and other companies come in and build the rest of the home. But he talked about what it means to build people's homes. It's not a house, it's a home. And he really got into that. And he said, remember back when you had your first home and you got the keys and you walked through that front door and you were so excited because you finally had a place that was your own. That's why I get up and that's why I do this every day. And I enable people to build beautiful lives, our customers, our clients, and the people that work here. And he kind of launched this whole thing. And all of a sudden, you saw people wiping their tears in the room because it's like it kind of connected them back to what this is all about. So, yes, I love the idea of imagery. And that does paint a beautiful picture. You think about a home versus a house. Absolutely. Yep. But it really started with expressing the why behind the what.
Yeah, I love that. And I am always open to having guests challenge my comments or perspective. So that's awesome.
Yeah, make it personal. Make it personal. Can we do something radical and you can totally cut it out?
Sure.
All right, let's do a little exercise, okay? Because we did this with the construction company and it was incredible how it happened. And you might need to take a second. So,
all right. Am I going to cry?
I don't know.
All right.
I don't know. You might, but you can always cut it. So,
all right. I'm here to be vulnerable. I have 2 young boys. I cry much more now than I used to.
You have no idea how much that means to me. I love it I love vulnerability. I don't want to be too Brene Brown on you, but I just love it. Okay. So we're going to do this exercise. What describes me and what defines me? And I want you to think of 3 to 5 bullets for each. You might need a minute to kind of jot down. I'll model the behavior. Okay. I'll go first. I just did this at a summit on stage. It was an extraordinary experience. Okay. So what describes me versus what defines me? What describes me is I'm married. I'm a partner at Night Agency. I have 20 years experience. I have no kids and I'm a dog mom. That perfectly describes me. You could say, oh yeah, I know Danielle now. Like I know those things about her, but it's not what defines me. And I might get a little emotional talking about this, but what defines me is I was a dancer since I was 2 years old, little ballerina. And I got a scholarship to go to school for dance in Pittsburgh. But then my mom got sick. She had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was a terrible, terrible type of cancer. And after 5 years of battling that, chemotherapy and a bone marrow transplant and everything, she lost her battle and we lost her. It was really, really hard. Really, really gruesome way to pass away. But she was my connection to dance. I was her little ballerina. I did it for her. I brought home the trophies for her. And so after she passed, I really lost my connection with dance. I really couldn't do it anymore. So I kind of stopped that. I took a beat in my life and what am I going to do now? Because I thought I was going to be a prima ballerina. I went back to school for advertising and public relations, got my degree, and fast forward, I'm back performing again. I'm on stage a lot. I lead storytelling workshops with our clients. I was just on stage with Small Giants. It was really cool. They even had some walkout music, so I really felt like I was getting ready to dance. Pretty awesome. So all of that kind of taught me a couple things. First of all, I can take a punch and get back up, but also the story of us can evolve, and it doesn't end when certain chapters end. And it was a beautiful thing to kind of come to that conclusion. So that really defines who I am. And what does all this mean when we're talking about employees and engagement? I don't know that we need to go that deep with everybody, but I will tell you, describe a scenario where it would not be beneficial for a leader to understand more deeply what drives their employees, how they tick, what gets them out of bed every morning, right? So me, knowing that I was a dancer, I like stage time, I love all of that. My company honors that by getting me out there, getting me up there, having me perform, having me present. They know that lights my fire and keeps me motivated. So sharing that with them was super helpful for me and I think for my company. So that's just, that's mine. I would love for you to go there and share yours.
I'm happy to. I will just say one thing before I do mine. I think this is a great exercise and this kind of stuff is fun. I think for anybody who's like, well, I don't know how that ties to what we're going to do with our internal branding work. I think you could just add on the question, define who you are at work or define why you are here versus working somewhere else. Like you can just make that same question about the work the person is doing and you would get a bunch of insights too. And you'd get a great story about why they're doing what they're doing. We ask the question at work. We've been asking it more and more. What is the company's locked in? What is your locked in moment? Just describe whatever that locked in moment is. And hardly any of it is, I had a success renewing some client's insurance program. It's all about some human connection they had or how they were supported by the business or how they got the opportunity to support somebody else through the business. It's all the human connection stuff that was their moment that they went for.
I love that.
So I promise I will do it. I didn't write anything down, but let's just go off the top.
Awesome.
So what describes me? I'm a husband, father, brother, son. I am generally a leader in the things that I do, or at least try to model that even when I'm not formally that. I am a salesperson, writer, creative. I try to be a good person and help people where I can. I would say that describes me.
I love it.
What defines me? This is the deeper one. What defines me is a drive to lead a significant life.
Wow.
And that I'm constantly wrestling with what that means for me and battling with significant externally or significant internally. And I've made progress over the years at turning that lens around and having it be significant just to me. But I firmly believe that we get one shot at this life. And if there's something we want to do, we should do it while we're here. And so I like doing things that are tangible and I like doing things that are esoteric and I like having lots of experiences. So I think what defines me is the drive to experience as much of the world as I can, to create as much as I can, and then to turn around and help others do that with their lives as much as I can.
That's a beautiful answer. So I know that you're the host here, but I have to ask a follow-up because I love your answer so much. Where did that come from? Because, like, did you have a moment in your life where you thought, wow, this is actually very finite and I better make all these moments count? Or I'm dying to know because you said that as if you've said that before.
I have said that before, plenty of times. So I work with a coach, and one of the things that they have had me do is write down statements around what my beliefs are. And so a lot of that has gained clarity through that. We'll go real deep here and you can get some of my personal philosophies, but I think that came from a couple things. One was wrestling with what my religious beliefs were. And do I believe in an afterlife? Do I not? What is that? And I said, well, at the very least, let's hedge on the fact that we only get one shot at this. And I think that's kind of where I landed, was like, I'm open to the fact that there could be more out there, but let's hedge that this is the one shot we get, because if I'm wrong, great. If I'm right, we've at least taken advantage of our one shot. So that was like my rationale for that piece of it. And then it was an opportunity. I've always been just kind of like interested in exploring the things that I'm interested in. And I've always had a wide array of interests, but it was little experiences along the way in high school and college, and then early in my career, where I just made the choice to do the thing I was interested in, and nobody stopped me, and it was great. And it sort of showed me that there's nothing preventing me from doing things I want to do other than me just choosing not to do them or not putting the time or energy into it. So it just was very empowering to say, if there's something I want to do, let's go do it. And it's manifested in a lot of really fun ways. You know, I've always liked writing. I have always wanted to leave something for my kids. I like distilling down wisdom. So I published a children's book last year that was written for adults about how they can build a strong sense of self, but I wrote it in a style and with illustrations that would resonate for kids. And so I put that out, and it just scratched like 4 itches at once. So that's the kind of thing.
I love it. Oh, I love it. That's on my bucket list. I've always wanted to tackle a children's book. So I have to ask, my answer's so weird. What is your favorite children's book? Like growing up, what is a book that you just loved?
Growing up, I can't remember what was my favorite one. As an adult, the one that prompted me to write the book I wrote was Oh, the Places You'll Go.
Ah, it's a great book.
Which is a classic one. But I was reading it to my then 2-year-old and was just like, man, this is way more for me than it is for him. And back to Pixar, I was like, why aren't there more books like this? You know, Pixar's made a whole billions of dollars on writing movies for adults that are couched in kids' imagery. And they resonate with everybody. And, you know, we cry at the end of every Pixar movie.
Yes, I do.
And so that was the premise for that.
That's awesome.
If you want to talk about children's publishing, we can talk about that offline, and happy to walk you through what my journey was.
I would love to learn more. I think that's really, really cool that you did that. Yeah. And you know what, going back to Pixar and storytelling, because I come from copywriting where everything, advertising, where everything was very sensational and, you really blew it out, right? You talked about things in the grandest way. I think sometimes in corporate communications, we forget that there's an opportunity to get people just as excited about the things you're doing in the workplace as we do for consumers about a product. And so one of the things I think Knight does really well is we take that external storytelling. Again, it's very authentic, but we don't lose sight of the fact that people still want to be inspired. They want to be connected. They want to be engaged. They want to get excited. When we do our listening sessions, we go into, tell us about a day at work that you just love. It's similar probably to the locked in moment. You could probably imagine how many people after sharing that say, oh my gosh, I forgot what gets me so excited about this job. We did these listening sessions with teachers at ASU, and they talked about graduation day and how some of those, especially sort of the underdog students that had some struggles along the way, watching them walk across the stage and just, they cry talking about these moments. That's a really powerful use of storytelling, just to remind people of what this is all about, why we're in this together.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue then into another question that I have, which is back to what you talked about around the values leading to behaviors, leading to the narrative. Because I think when we define this kind of thing and we put it out there, it creates a huge opportunity and it also creates a big risk. And if we tell this grand story that this is the experience you're going to have working here, and then we reinforce it and people show up and they feel it, man, that's where you get acceleration and people are like, this is awesome. But if you tell that grand story and make a big deal about it, and then they walk back to their desk and their manager shits on them, it's like more compounded than if the manager had just been a jerk to begin with. So what is the work to make sure that the behaviors are matching the narrative?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. That goes back to the process that I kind of talked about earlier. Number one, first and foremost, is getting leadership alignment. The leaders have to really, truly sign off in their own blood. They have to sign off that they believe that this purpose, that these values, this story that we're going to put out that describes who we are and what we believe is true. And we're going to stand up to it. We're going to make tough decisions against it. We're going to model this. We're going to walk the talk the walk, all of it. Step number one. And then the other piece is, of course, there's communications, getting the story out in all the unique and different ways we do that. And then that org integration piece, getting the reward system in place, the interviewing process aligned, how we review talent. Should the values show up in the review process? Absolutely. It's a full sensory experience from what we hear, what we see, what we feel, what we believe, all the way through. If that's not all happening, yes, people are going to call BS on the values, on the story, on the purpose. The other thing I would say too is really helping people find their story within your story. So we were, for a company, for example, we launched their purpose, and we're about to launch their purpose, and they loved it. And we wrote a whole anthem and we did a video and everything. And oh my gosh, this is who we are. The leaders were high-fiving and re-energized, and this is great. We're going to launch all of this beautiful work at our next town hall. Before launch, we wanted to make sure that people were really feeling it so that it didn't feel like it was coming top down, that it was coming from the employee out. We grabbed a $40 microphone on Amazon and we ran around the office 2 days before. And we ran, excuse me, Bob, in accounting. Let's say your purpose is to build better lives. How do you in accounting build better lives? And we actually recorded people's sound bites. Yeah, some people were like, I don't know. I help us make money. It took a minute for people to really think about it. But when we got them thinking, they realized they were part of this bigger story. What they did every day for the company was actually significant in the bigger story. So we collected all these sound bites and we did a pretty quick video, with the sound bites playing and the text on the screen. And they played that as the centerpiece in the town hall. And all of a sudden, it was this aha moment where everybody had a piece of the story for themselves. You have to say it, demonstrate it, believe it, integrate it, but you also have to help everyone find their personal story within the story.
Yeah, that's great advice. Hard to do sometimes.
Hard to do.
Right? But great advice. How do you help leaders or people like this? I guess this is a good segue. So how do you help people who are struggling with that or who are like, I don't know if that feels authentic for me, right? There's this corporate message now, and I'm supposed to do this, and I don't I don't see myself in that quite yet. And I don't want to communicate something that's not authentic to me. So how do you help people find their story within the story and find the authentic way that they can express whatever the story is?
Are you talking about leaders, employees, or really
Let's talk about it, leaders, I think. Yeah, let's go with leaders. And maybe you're like, it's not really an issue, and that's a fine answer.
Yeah. So we haven't really we do our due diligence in, once we do our listening with leaders and we do our listening with employees and we kind of go through our process, we really do our due diligence to get leaders back in the room and have conversation. It's less of a presentation of here's your purpose, here's your values, here's your story, and more of a conversation of here it is. We're going to read it to you. Sometimes we even say, all right, everybody close their eyes and we read them their story. Does it sound like you? Does it feel like you? And we give them an opportunity to really look at it. And, it can be a line by line sort of picking apart of what this means and why did we choose this word. But ultimately, it's really doing the work and having the patience. That's that consultative layer for us of making sure that they see themselves in the story and that it's true. That is a shorter pathway and a shorter window, because if we've done our job right and we've really listened, we tend to capture the truth in that story. For employees, though, it's a little bit longer of a journey sometimes. For example, when we ran around with a microphone and we asked people, and some people were like, I don't know, like that sounds like a lofty, we're building better lives. I don't know. I sit here and I create widgets. Like, what am I doing? It's really kind of taking a moment. Well, talk to me about what you do on a day-to-day basis. Okay, well, I make sure that our books are secure, or I'm in charge of our financial growth and bottom line, or, however technical they get. And it's like, well, what would happen if you weren't doing that? And let's say that there was an empty seat, they didn't just fill it with somebody else. Like what would go wrong? And they kind of start thinking about that. Well, what happens when it goes right? And they start thinking about that. Well, that is making sure that the financial well-being and, is in place for the rest of the organization so people can keep their jobs. You can continue to grow and build this company and ultimately continue to build the city that you're building. So it kind of, you start with making it really personal and kind of giving somebody a moment to really think about what they're doing. And then you back them into how that makes an impact today for us as a company, for us in the community, for us in the world, if that's appropriate.
Love that. Love that. And let's finish with where you finished your initial. I love that you set this up in the beginning and we're just following your initial story. Making it last. This isn't a set it or forget it thing. This has to become how you operate and how you communicate, right? This has to be the way that you talk about your business and working within your business on an ongoing basis until that story changes. So what are the ways that companies integrate this the best and make it a lasting endeavor?
Always on storytelling is a beautiful way to do it. So, as I mentioned earlier, we collect people stories as proof points. So let's put aside the personal stories for a minute, because that's one way to kind of connect, right? The other side of that is when we do interviews and we capture and collect people stories, we ask them questions about things like benefits, for example. Tell me about a standout benefit that this company offers that you haven't experienced before and why that's mattered to you. MasterCard, for example, has a fertility benefit. And we got a great story about a woman who could not have kids and went through the whole process and finally ended up kind of taking advantage of this benefit, and she had twins. And it was like, surprise! Now it really worked, right? It was a great, great story, though. And so we collect stories like this and make sure that that's an always-on strategy so that we are continuing to tell stories to prove out whatever it is we're claiming to be our belief. That's one way to do it. Communications is a big one. How is your communications ecosystem working in a way that the beliefs and values are relevant and in the forefront of what we're talking about, and ebb and flow as things change? We know pandemic, if it's taught us nothing, it's taught us that time, things really change at warp speed in the workplace, and people feel differently and want different things. And so, how does communication sort of flex and meet people where they are in that way and keep the beliefs alive in that way? And then the other piece to this is creating rituals. The best example of a ritual, this is going to be a consumer product, but go with me on this for a second.
Yeah, no, I like the concept of rituals. So continue.
Rituals are awesome. So, and by the way, there's a cake in the break room. We're celebrating Susie's birthday is not a ritual. Okay, we got to do better than that. So think about Corona and the lime. Most people never stop to realize that a Corona doesn't really need a lime to be a good beer, right? And I'm not claiming that I'm heavy into Corona or anything, but Corona, a genius marketing firm, created the lime ritual, which boosted Corona sales like never before because it's fun to stick that lime in and put your thumb in and flip it upside down. You know that whole thing, right? Yeah. Companies can do this too. So this is probably going to be a lamer example when we're talking about Corona, but back to my example of wellness. If a company, one of the things they claim is important to them is the well-being of their employees, everybody does a walk on Fridays at lunchtime and everybody kind of gets together and, it's even ritualistic to put the tennis shoes on and, a couple people pop into the locker room and change into their walking stuff, whatever. And everybody goes on this walk. Every Friday around lunchtime, they go on this walk. That is a great ritual. It builds camaraderie. I don't even want to say team building because that's so cringy to me. It's really about getting together with people that you work with that hopefully are friends at some level and going on a walk and getting your steps in. There are lots of examples, but rituals are so culture building. Culture building. And you can even do it with your town halls. You can add a twist to town hall where you always start with everybody gets up and does this sort of breathing exercise together and, or some yoga stretching, and you feel really goofy doing it, but you almost kind of laugh because you know that every town hall is going to start that way because it's our thing. It's our thing here at Locked In. So I would say the combination of all that and, importantly, remembering that it is, I keep using this word, but it is an ecosystem. What are we saying? What are we doing? What are we experiencing? It's all kind of got to be part of it to keep this stuff alive. Yeah.
Have you read The Power of Moments?
Yes.
Have you read that book? Because they talk about ritual in there and peak end experiences. And that's for anyone who's like, oh, that ritual thing is interesting. That's a great book to check out, to think about ways that you can create unique and memorable experiences for your people.
Rituals are, yes, I love that book. I don't remember if it was in that book, but do you remember or have you heard of when you have an organization with a sales team, if somebody makes a sale, you have a walkout music for them. So you find out whatever their hype song is. And when they've made a sale and they hang up that phone, you play that like, all I do is win, for example, you know what I mean? And it plays through the hallways. Like what a great, it's silly, it's fun, but life, to your earlier point, is so short. So we should probably have fun while we're doing this thing.
There you go. Way to bring that back in. Yeah. I didn't know that was going to be relevant again. Yeah, fully agree. And, we talk all the time in my business because we're doing predominantly insurance consulting. It's like, look, we're doing insurance here. We might as well make it fun while we're doing it. It's dry on its own. We might as well make it fun. And so I like that mindset of you might as well make it fun.
Yeah.
Danielle, this has been fantastic. Went deeper than I thought we would, but all about how we tell our authentic stories. Love that. Where can people find you, find Night Agency? We'll link to everything in the show notes, but if people want more Danielle in their lives or need help with this type of work, where can they engage with you?
This is probably the hardest, most embarrassing question because you can always go to nightagency.com and that's our company website, and you can poke around and see some of the storytelling that we've done as an agency. Personally, you can find me on LinkedIn, Danielle Krischik. I and my name is hard to spell, but Krischik, and send me a message. I love meeting and connecting with people. What you won't find on there is posts or any of my own personal branding. And you're probably thinking, what the heck? But it's like, what is it? The shoemaker has no shoes. You know, I have not pathetically worked on my own brand, but you can find me there. And I would absolutely love to connect. I love meeting new people. So that would be awesome.
Well, when this comes out, you'll have at least one post.
Yes. I better hurry up after we hang up and go post something so it looks like I'm alive. But I just want to say to you, this is really fun. I'll just call myself out. It's my first time being a guest on a podcast. I had such a good time with you. I love all of the things we're talking about, and what you do at Locked In is obviously super important to what we do. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, you were very welcome, and you did a great job for your first run at it. So you're a pro now. And for anybody out there listening, thank you for spending time with us. Hope this has been helpful. And I think I would encourage you, if this is something that you really need help with, Danielle and her team are fantastic. And in the meantime, as you're starting to think about that, like, you can take any one of these elements. How do you ask better questions and solicit better information from your employees? Like, how do you actually go out and get information? How do you tie stories to your values, to the behaviors? How do you make sure that's all integrated? Like, these are all things that we can all be doing. Yes, it's great to have a trainer and a coach who can, like, in Danielle and her team, who can pull you through this, but the individual elements of this are all usable tomorrow if you just give it a little bit of forethought. So encourage people to go out and create better stories and really align their stories with their behaviors, because I think that's really where the magic happens. So thank you for listening. Danielle, thank you for coming, and best of luck to everybody out there.
Thank you.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.